In a small, secluded town, there's a legend about a cabin hidden deep in the woods. It's not on any map, and the few who stumble upon it by accident always describe the same eerie feeling, a sense that they're not alone. Years ago, a group of hikers found the cabin while exploring, thinking it would be an exciting discovery, but the inside told a different story. The cabin was abandoned, with a thick layer of dust covering every surface, yet signs of recent activity were unmistakable. Fresh footprints in the dust, a fire that looked like it had just been extinguished, and a single, open notebook on the table. The hikers flipped through it, only to find disturbing messages, all in different handwriting, saying things like "Don't look back, it's watching, and you're next." One of the hikers snapped a photo of the notebook, but as they left the cabin, they heard footsteps behind them. When they turned around, there was no one there. They ran out of the forest, terrified, and decided to return the next day with more people. But no matter how hard they looked, the cabin was gone. All they had was the blurry photo of the notebook, a reminder of the cabin that seemed to disappear into thin air. A young couple, Sarah and Ben, had finally found their dream home, a charming, old two-story house in a peaceful, small-town neighborhood. They were thrilled to start a new chapter there, imagining family gatherings, cozy winters by the fireplace, and a fresh start in their first home together. But within a few weeks, their excitement turned into unease as strange events began to unravel. It started subtly. Late at night, as they were lying in bed, they'd hear faint noises, whispers, almost a soft to hear. They brushed it off as the sound of the house settling, blaming the wind or old pipes. But the noises grew clearer with time, and soon they could make out distinct words. Words like "come closer," "can you hear me?" and even unsettling phrases like "help me and don't leave me." Ben was convinced there had to be a logical explanation. Perhaps old insulation or a critter trapped inside the walls. So, one night, he decided to investigate. He knocked on various parts of the walls, trying to pinpoint where the sounds were coming from. But every time he knocked, the whispers would stop, only to start again once he was back in bed. Finally, they decided to call a handyman to inspect the walls, hoping he'd find some simple explanation that would put their minds at ease. When the handyman arrived, he carefully examined each room, moving from wall to wall. Eventually, he found something unusual in the master bedroom, a small, hidden panel in the wall that didn't appear on the house's blueprints. The couple watched as he pried the panel open, revealing a narrow, dusty crawl space that stretched along the wall. As the flashlight illuminated the cramped space, they gasped. Inside were old, tattered belongings, a worn teddy bear, faded clothes, and a rusted tin box filled with letters. But what caught their attention most was a small, battered journal. Sarah carefully took it out and began to read, piecing together the tragic story of a young girl named Lily who had once lived in the house decades ago. The diary entries were fragmented and distressed. It seemed that Lily had been trapped in that very crawl space by a family member, possibly a relative who had suffered from mental illness, as hinted at in the entries. The final, shaky words in the diary read, "If anyone finds this, please don't leave me alone here." The couple was horrified, but things only got worse. That night, the voices in the walls returned, louder and more desperate than before. "Help me," the whispers echoed, as if someone was pleading from within the walls. Sarah and Ben couldn't sleep. Every time they closed their eyes, the whispers would start again, filling the room with a cold, eerie presence. The next day, shaken and exhausted, they packed their bags and left the house, unable to bear the constant, ghostly pleas any longer. They never returned. Local rumors say that anyone who spends a night in that house can still hear Lily's voice, forever trapped in the walls, begging not to be forgotten. A few years ago, a group of friends decided to spend a weekend hiking through a remote forest near their hometown. The trail was rugged and rarely traveled, winding through dense woods and up steep hills, far away from cell service and civilization. They were seasoned hikers and felt ready for the challenge, excited to explore the untouched wilderness. Everything was going smoothly until late afternoon, when one of them, Mark, spotted what looked like an old, overgrown side trail that wasn't on any map. Curiosity got the best of them, and despite one friend's hesitation, they decided to follow it, eager to see where it led. The path was narrow and barely visible, with tangled vines and branches blocking their way. As they walked further, they noticed an eerie silence settling around them. No birds, no wind, only the crunch of leaves under their boots. After about half an hour, they came across a clearing with a strange, worn-out stone structure that looked like an old well or a cellar entrance, partially buried and covered in moss. As they gathered around, one of the friends, Sam, insisted on taking a closer look. Mark held back, feeling a growing sense of dread, but Sam and another friend, Emily, moved closer, peering into the dark opening. It looked like it hadn't been touched in decades, maybe even centuries. Then, in a matter of seconds, Sam seemed to vanish. One moment, he was standing by the structure, and the next, he was gone. Emily screamed, and the others rushed to the spot where he had been, calling his name. They searched frantically, shining their flashlights around, but there was no trace of him. It was as if he had been swallowed by the forest itself. Terrified, they decided to retrace their steps and head back to the main trail, hoping Sam had somehow gone ahead. But as they made their way back, they realized something was very wrong. The path didn't look familiar, and landmarks they had noted earlier were missing. It was as though the forest had shifted around them. Hours passed, and night fell, but they couldn't find their way out. Eventually, they stumbled back onto the main trail, disoriented and exhausted, just as dawn was breaking. There was no sign of Sam, and he was never found, despite search parties combing the area for weeks. Years later, hikers in the area occasionally report strange occurrences around that old, overgrown trail. Disembodied whispers, feelings of being watched, and, sometimes, the faint, desperate voice of someone calling for help. Locals warn that anyone who ventures too close to that part of the forest risks becoming just another name added to the list of the lost. In a quiet suburban neighborhood, a woman named Lily moved into a charming, old Victorian house. She loved the place's vintage charm and spacious rooms, and looked forward to making it her own. But soon after moving in, she began to notice something strange. Every evening around dusk, she would catch a glimpse of a figure standing by the window of the room across the hallway from her bedroom. At first, she thought she was just seeing things. The figure always seemed like a shadow, a man, just standing there, looking out the window. One night, she decided to confront her fear. Armed with a flashlight, she crept down the hallway and entered the room, determined to face whatever was there. But as she shone her flashlight around, she realized the room was empty, just as she expected. She let out a breath, feeling silly for scaring herself. But as she turned to leave, she froze. The reflection of a man was staring back at her in the window. Lily's heart raced as she looked closer. The figure wasn't outside. It was in the reflection, standing just inches behind her. She turned quickly, but there was no one there. Panicked, she backed out of the room, never taking her eyes off the window until she reached her bedroom and shut the door. After that night, things got worse. Every time she saw the man, he seemed to get closer. One evening, as she lay in bed, she could swear she heard faint footsteps coming down the hallway, stopping just outside her door. She didn't sleep that night, keeping the light on and her eyes fixed on the door. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. She moved out the next day, leaving the house and her belongings behind. The last she heard, the house remained empty, with locals sometimes claiming they've seen a shadowy figure in the upstairs window, still standing there, waiting for someone to come back. One evening, Emily was home alone, relaxing and scrolling through her phone when it suddenly rang. She didn't recognize the number, but something about it felt eerily familiar. Hesitantly, she answered, and the voice on the other end was unmistakable. It was her friend Rachel's voice. But Rachel had passed away 3 years ago in a tragic car accident. The voice on the other end was faint, filled with static, but she could make out certain words. "Emily, I need help." Shocked and scared, Emily asked who it was, and the voice answered, "It's me, Rachel." Emily's heart skipped a beat as chills ran down her spine. She was frozen, barely able to process what was happening. The voice continued, "I can't find my way. It's dark. So cold." Emily stammered, trying to make sense of it, asking if this was some kind of prank. But the voice on the other end sounded desperate and unmistakably like Rachel, even using the same expressions and phrases her friend used when she was alive. Then, in an eerie whisper, Rachel's voice told her something she could never forget. "I need you to come to the place we last met, please." Before it's too late, the line went dead, and Emily sat there in silence, clutching the phone. The last time she'd seen Rachel was at an old, abandoned park they'd explored just days before her accident. Against her better judgment, Emily decided to go to the park, driven by a feeling she couldn't shake. She arrived late at night, the air chilling her to the bone. The park was quiet, the rusted swings creaking softly in the wind. She called out, half expecting her friend to somehow appear. Suddenly, she heard a soft voice whisper her name, just like on the call. She turned, and for a brief moment, she saw a shadowy figure that looked just like Rachel, standing under a street lamp in the distance. But as she blinked, it disappeared. Emily ran back to her car, overwhelmed and shaken, and didn't look back. From that day on, she never received another call from Rachel. But every now and then, her phone would light up late at night, showing that same familiar number, with a missed call that vanished before she could answer.